Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Kester. I'm a cattleman from Parkfield, California, and currently serve as president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm pleased to welcome you to NCBA's Cattlemen's webinar series, Sustainable Update, featuring cattlemen and women from around the country who have been involved in the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and will provide an update on their recently released sustainability framework. I too have been involved as NCBA's representative, and I am excited that the work of so many is being released to the public. Part of what we hope you come away with tonight is motivation to look into the framework further, and most importantly, to provide us feedback. Towards the end of tonight's webinar, Debbie Lyons-Blythe of Blythe Family Farms will walk through how to provide that feedback, and I sincerely hope you do. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen, and at the end of the presentation, the NCBA Sustainable Presenters will answer several of your questions. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available in a few days at beefusa.org. We have a number of presenters tonight, which you can see on the screen. Steve Wooten, cow-calf operator in Colorado. Tom McDonald from Five Rivers Cattle Feeding. Mike Williams, cow-calf operator in California. Scott Anderson with CRI Feeders. Debbie Lyons-Blythe, cow-calf producer from Kansas. And Ben Weinheimer with Texas Cattle Feeders Association. And with that, Ben, I will turn it over to you to introduce U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and the work you've been able to accomplish. Ben?
Great. Thank you, Kevin, and appreciate everyone joining us on the webinar today. Over the past few years, I've had the opportunity to be engaged with all aspects of the Roundtable since its inception a few years ago. We look forward to sharing our work with you as we want to highlight the process that the beef supply chain has engaged in and present some of the outcomes of these efforts to date. As part of our discussions tonight, many of our folks that have been engaged in this process will focus on these areas that you see here on the screen. I won't touch on those now because you'll hear a lot more of that detail as we go into this. I would also ask that, as Kevin referenced, that you consider going to the framework website where we are soliciting public comments. That is usrsbframework.org. And this same format you'll find there in terms of how that content on that framework website is populated. But first, let's talk a little bit about how the Roundtable is formed as we look at the membership of the organization as it exists today. So today, the organization consists of over 100 members that represent all aspects of the supply chain. The Roundtable was initially formed in the 2014-2015 timeframe and was officially launched in March of 2015. It is a completely voluntary organization. It includes primarily what we consider the 5 main segments of the beef supply chain, from producers, processors, retail food service, and then some of our allied partners, both our allied industry entities as well as civil society. So collectively, those members, which represent all types of individuals and organizations that produce cattle and beef for the U.S. and the world, they represent approximately 30% of the cattle in the country, 80% of the beef processed, and 28% of U.S. beef consumers. It's also important to note that as you see this slide on the screen, that approximately 50% of the members are cattlemen and women across the U.S., as well as a number of cattle organizations and associations, both state level organizations and national. And the last thing I want to highlight and emphasize, as you've had an opportunity to look at many of the logos that represent all aspects of the supply chain, near the bottom of the slide, you'll see this civil society category. That includes both the non-governmental organizations that have cooperated with us in this effort, as well as universities and research institutions that have an agricultural beef production focus to help us advance not just this work, but all things related to cattle production. Next, we'll go into and talk a little bit about how did we get to this point. So on the slide that you will see here on the screen, we have what we refer to as our USRSB Sustainability Assurance Framework. Now, seems like a pretty complicated set of words to describe what we've come up with in terms of a fairly simple process to convey a lot of the good things that cattlemen and women are doing throughout the U.S. already. And as part of this, I think you'll, as we depict here in this graphic, we'll describe in more detail exactly what is included in this framework. And just as importantly, we want to clarify what we consider to not be included in the scope of the Roundtable's responsibility. So as we walk through this and talk a little bit about the process, I'll orient you a little bit to this slide. There's a lot of information here, but yet, again, I think it's fairly straightforward. So you'll see there the 5 kind of areas of work that the Roundtable has focused on. You'll notice off to the right-hand side that we consider these to be the things that the Roundtable will develop, own, and promote the use throughout the supply chain on a voluntary basis. These include our indicators for the beef value chain. We'll talk about those in more detail here shortly. Those what we consider and the whole supply chain collectively considered to be the areas of most important for us to focus on and message around to consumers about the good things that cattle producers in the U.S. are doing, as well as our beef processors and retailers. Much of that work was done in the first year of the Roundtable in the 2015 timeframe. And then from there, we moved into developing what are termed here segment-specific metrics. This is where each of the segments of the supply chain were asked to go look at these 6 key areas that we developed, and that the whole supply chain agreed to focus on around animal health and well-being, efficiency and yield, water resources, land resources, air and greenhouse gases, and employee safety and well-being. So that again, that first step was around the Roundtable as an entire supply chain coming to agreement around those 6 key areas. And then that area again on segment-specific metrics was to ask that each of our segments of the supply chain take those 6 focus areas and develop metrics that they felt were most appropriate for their specific part of the supply chain. So that was very much owned, if you will, by the members in the Roundtable that represented each of those segments of the supply chain. They brought forward what they thought most appropriate to address each of those 6 indicators of sustainability. The third area that we focused on, and so just to again kind of share again with you the timeline. So kind of the first year was on the indicators, 2015, 2016. We focused on the metrics, and then that third area in 2017 into 18 was around these sustainability assessment guides. And you're going to hear a lot more detail from our other presenters about the content of these guides that help further flesh out the details within each of the metrics, make it more meaningful, more applicable to each operation in the supply chain. The 2 other areas there on the slide are around education, training, and outreach. So there's already work that's beginning now as we develop these top 3 areas to begin focusing on how can the Roundtable help communicate and provide resources and tools to encourage the uptake and implementation of these indicators and metrics. And then the last item you see there is on external projects. Most of the time we'll refer to those as pilot projects. And these are areas where the supply chain members have come together voluntarily, again, put together some kind of demonstration projects, sourcing cattle from ranches that are using these metrics, as well as following those cattle all the way through the supply chain, through the feed yard, and into the packers and retailers. The one thing that I mentioned early on this slide is that we also want to emphasize what the focus of the Roundtable does not include. So near the bottom, you'll see a dotted line, indicates a couple of things that are important for us to clarify, that the roundtable is not going to be and has no structure around becoming either a certification or a verification body. So to the extent that the supply chain partnerships, as you see here, we refer to as being implemented by business-to-business supply chains, to the extent that entities within the supply chain want to stand up additional concepts around this work, then by all means they have the latitude to do that. But that is not a function of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. The next slide then is very much around emphasizing that this is intended to be a wholly voluntary, a self-paced approach where we already know that everyone in the supply chain is working every day to improve what they're doing, that they're looking for opportunities to improve their efficiency, to protect natural resources, to make sure that their employees have a safe workplace. But nonetheless, it's important that we continue to message to our consumers and to the world that as we've structured this around identifying, so we've identified these 6 high priority areas that we feel everybody in the beef supply chain can align to and really focus their energy and efforts around. We've developed concepts for planning. So as you'll hear these comments later in our discussions today around the metrics, many of the metrics that have been developed for the cow-calf, auction markets, and feed yards are plan-based metrics. So this is not around trying to figure out, a specific quantification of water, a specific quantity of air emissions. It's around what kind of plans and practices can we put in place on our ranches, auction markets, and feed yards to help further advance the U.S. Cattle production system. The last part, or a couple of parts here then, are around executing. So in our concepts here, this is very much around these sustainability assessment guides, emphasis on, assessment. If you want to insert the word self-assessment in there, probably even more appropriate. And then guides. They're not intended to be something that mandates specific practices or programs, but they're guides around here's what we would consider most appropriate for each of these indicators and these associated metrics that have been identified by many of your colleagues in the cattle industry. And you'll hear as we go into these sustainability assessment guides that they, again, touch on the metric. They include some key elements to consider. They have suggestions on desired outcomes and success criteria, as well as some links to tools and resources if you are specifically looking for more information to address a specific area or a focus point within your operation. And then the last part, of course, is just to periodically review. There's no definition around this in terms of how often or how frequent that would need to be done, but that as you implement these indicators and metrics and these assessment guides, that you can use all of these tools collectively to review your operations and continue to make improvements, again, on your own time and at your own pace. And so as we go to the next slide and look at these high priority indicators in a little bit more detail, I just want to highlight for you the process here again that we went through, where as the roundtable was formed in that 2015 window, as we put together a large group of folks that represented the entire supply chain and tried to begin to really determine, where can we all come to agreement on the most important areas or most important topics to focus on. So through that process and the initial meetings of the roundtable, that included a whole evaluation of a number of issues at initially we had 160 different topics that were brought forward by, again, all of those constituencies and all those organizations and people that represented your interest and the other interest of the supply chain downstream from the cattlemen. And through this process of lumping and prioritizing, the whole supply chain agreed to focus on these 6 key areas. So as you'll see here throughout the presentation, we've put some definitions to those, knowing full well that not everybody had the opportunity to be engaged in those discussions over the past few years. So we wanted to, provide some clarity about what we mean for each of these. And as you look at animal health and well-being, clearly a focus on cattle health, nutrition, care, and comfort, efficiency and yield, definitely something that we, work towards every day in the cattle industry by improving our efficiency and our yield of product and cattle that we produce before we hand those off down the supply chain. Water resources encompasses both water quantity, so the water consumed, as well as water quality, and then land, all things related to land resources, so the stewardship of habitat, water, soil, and biodiversity as a few examples there. The last 2 indicators then are around air and greenhouse gas emissions. So whether that be here you see it referred to as particulate matter or dust emissions, greenhouse gases, or other gaseous emissions that should be considered. And then the last indicator around employee safety and well-being. So implementation of safety programs and training to ensure that we do provide that safe workplace day in and day out. So that's a kind of a very high level overview of the process that we've been through, the focus that we've maintained to this point. And at this point in time, I'll turn the program over to Steve Wooten. He's a Colorado rancher with Beatty Canyon Ranch and the Colorado Cattlemen's Association.
Thank you, Ben. Ben touched on a little bit of the complexity and the diversity of the group that made up the U.S. Roundtable, and to think that we all came to Denver and several other places across the country to meet and begin to work on the indicators and metrics, and it was a simple process is a bit of an understatement. We had quite a bit of learning curve and area to cover, from cow-calf and stalker and the producer side of it up through to the retailer side of it. And as we were working on indicators and ultimately metrics, there was quite a bit of time that we had to do some training and some sharing of education in order to come to a common agreement on how we would pick the indicators and ultimately each sector picking their own metrics. But I'll give credit to the group because everybody came in, rolled up their sleeves, and dedicated themselves to working together in a continuous format to put this forward to you. And they did a great job. I hope you benefit from it and look forward to it. Within the land resources, and as we start in land resources, I want to share how we got to this. Every sector was involved in the decision making on the metrics, but each sector, the cow-calf sector, the feedlot sector, the auction market sector, they had ultimate authority and decision making process over their metrics. And while we like metrics that are system metrics, that is, they go from one sector all the way through the sectors in its entirety, that's not always the case with the diversity of businesses and resource management and the challenges in each of those different sectors. So we had to realize that at times we're going to have sector-specific metrics that are important to that particular aspect of the supply chain, and we had to accept those and move forward. The other part of it was, as we worked on it, if we're looking at metrics that don't make positive improvement in the sector, then we have to look at either revising those metrics or replacing them. As I said, each each individual sector was responsible, but there was input from all the sectors. There was consideration given to all inputs. And what we put forth is what the group and what the individual sectors found to be the most appropriate metric for these indicators. In the land resources, which is the stewardship of terrestrial and aquatic habitat in relation to water, soil, and biodiversity in an area, impact of land use and land use conversion both caused by and prevented by ranching and farming activities. And within a cow-calf sector, the metric is a grazing management plan or equivalent being implemented to protect and or improve the land resources, including succession and transition planning. And while the grazing management plan is an important tool because it has direct impact on the pastures on which we operate, and it's important to the maintenance, improvement, and protection of our land resources, it also tells us what we're doing, how we're doing, are we making progress. By monitoring what we're doing, we know where we're coming from, and we'll see the pathway of how we're going to get to where we want to be in terms of improving the condition of our land and our resources on our land. The other aspect of it that was important is succession and transition. If there is not a plan for keeping working lands in working families' hands, then we fail to meet the objective of continuing to produce high quality product and high quality food. So that aspect of it was certainly important to land transition in succession and transition. In water resources, that's the volume of water consumed by a sector for each process and any impacts on water quality by the sector for each process. And in our cow-calf sector, we felt like the one implementing tool is a grazing management plan or an equivalent being implemented that maintains and improves water resources. A lot of the water that we use in the western United States is captured in the form of snow or rainfall, and in other areas it's a situation of too much water and how you manage what you do with that water. And so within that grazing management plan, it needs to take a look at what your current resources are, the conditions and assessments of those resources and the conditions that you're at, your defined goals and objectives. So if it's in the western United States, you're trying to retain water, and if it's other parts of the United States, you're having to deal with how you get water off of pastures and make them available to livestock. And then it's your management action that you select to achieve your goals. So is it grazing? Is it the use of mechanical equipment? Is it mowing? And it's the inclusion of locally relevant contingency plans. That's for drought, for development around you, things like that. And then the monitoring progress to manage the soil, the forage, the water, and the ecosystem health and the wildlife habitat. We feel that the success within a grazing management plan is the number of producers who implement effective grazing management plans. And that's going to have a positive effect both on the water resources on your property, but possibly and probably even into your financial success. It does not have to be a complicated spreadsheet. It can be as simple as a grazing management plan that's kept in your book in your shirt pocket, and you can work your way up to where you're comfortable using some of the programs that are available from colleges, non-governmental organizations, and even private firms in the industry. In the air and greenhouse gas emissions, they are the cumulative emissions of pollutants, including particulate matter, greenhouse gases, and other gaseous emissions from a sector for each process. And in our cow-calf, we believe that, again, a grazing management plan or its equivalent is being implemented to improve soil and plant community health, including soil carbon sequestration. And the elements to that, you need to have current resource conditions and an assessment of those conditions, your defined goals and objectives for what you want to achieve or can achieve with your type of resources that you're managing. Then the management actions selected to help you achieve those goals. And those resources are available online and at the USRSB, but also through your extension agents and non-government organizations, as well as private consultants. It has to have an inclusion of locally relevant contingency plans for what might happen, and then the monitoring progress that lets you know, are you making progress? Is there progress being made? And then how do you adapt to it? So a good grazing management plan that addresses air and gas issues can increase the carbon storage capacity of soil, reduce losses to the atmosphere, and increasing the number of producers that are using grazing management plans is going to have a positive impact and therefore be a part of our continuous improvement. In the indicator of efficiency and yield, as Ben was saying, the efficiency is the unit of input required to produce a unit of output. So it's a unit of input in our sector that produces a pound of output from our ranches or our farms. The concepts address both waste as a negative characteristic and they drive towards improved profitability. So within our efficiency and yield, the metric is there a strategy implemented to optimize animal productivity through improved nutrition, improved reproduction, genetic technologies, and practices appropriate to operational goals and context? And the key elements to consider in this are your goals and objectives of your operation. Your resource inventory, and that is, are you going to have to be utilizing just native grasses and what's there on the ranch? Do you have the ability to make available forages and grains for your cattle productivity? And then your marketing strategy. Where is the niche? Where is the location and the target of where you want your product marketed at? We feel that the success criteria is when we have greater number of operations that are starting to look at the efficiency of their units, whether it's the beginning with percent of cows bred per total number of cows exposed, or efficiencies of total amount of feed put into the cows for X number of pounds taken off the ranch. There are several different financial models that can be used in this. Lots of science and research done from the universities that can help with how to find a way to make the operation more efficient and produce more on given number of inputs. In animal health and well-being, the cumulative effects of cattle health, nutrition, care, and comfort. Within this one, we felt that the question of our beef quality assurance or similar program principles incorporated into the management of the farm or ranch. And the key elements of the beef quality assurance or the equivalent are you providing optimal nutrition to protect animal health, well-being, and performance? Does it include the development of a herd health plan? That could even include working with a veterinarian, even at the cow-calf level, just to have that additional insight and experience. Does the operation adhere to the beef quality assurance judicious antibiotic use guidelines? Does the operation provide facilities that allow safe and humane movement and restraint of livestock? Does the operation train employees and personnel on properly handling and care for cattle? And our success continuous improvement criteria on this is we know that if not properly cared for, there's a lot of negative impacts that happen to the operation. Poor cattle health reduces the efficiency of the cattle, reduces their performance, and increases their stress level. So as more operations begin to utilize BQA or other equivalent operations and meet some of these and answer some of these methods, then we feel like we're having success by the increased number of operations utilizing them. And in our employee safety and well-being indicator, the implementation of safety programs and training to provide a safe workplace and help to prevent workplace accidents and injuries associated with production, processing, and distribution of beef, and the relative prosperity of workers employed in those activities. And for our cow-calf sector, our metric was, are all individuals who are involved in the operation trained and practice implemented with regard to stockmanship and safety on the farm and ranch. And our key elements within our ranching and farming operations are, do we outline the role of each job? Does the operation identify general safety rules, policies, and procedures? Develop a training program around the rules, policies, and procedures. Have accountability procedures in place. Be available in various language that is spoken by the employees on the farm or the ranch. Does the operation involve workers in the development of safety guidelines? That is, allowing them to have input as to things that they see firsthand on the job. Does the operation ensure all employees, including owners and managers, are required to abide by the protocols that are set? Does the operation monitor and enforce the safety guidelines? Does it include an emergency response instructions to the guidelines? Are owners required managers to be CPR and first aid certified? And does the operation include evaluation procedures for training to determine effectiveness? And within this, our success is measured by the decreased number of accidents, the decreased number of challenging situations that our employees can find themselves in when working with cattle or working around facilities, that gates aren't hung properly, alleys aren't wide enough, nails and bolts protruding from around the corral facilities, and then quality fences in the pastures to make sure that cattle stay where you put them, and that they're not ranging where they're not supposed to be, and then forcing employees to have to go out and get them. So that the uptake and the greater number of operations that are taking a hard look at this and adjusting their program, and for us, one of the things as we looked at that was, in the past it's been a hand down from generation to generation, but as employees came into the operation, this was something we had to take a look at ourselves and say, are we really teaching enough early on so that an employee is aware of what our expectations are and how we want things done and what our expectations of them. This one's a different one for us too, but we found that it was relatively easy to begin to take up with this and share it with our employees and see progress happening quite rapidly. And I would like to hand it off to Tom McDonald. Tom is Vice President of Environmental Affairs at Five Rivers Feeding. He's been in that position since 2006. Tom has been involved with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef from its inception, and he is our sector champion for the feedlot.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate being here today and visiting with the group. I will be presenting the metrics for the feed yard sector, but I want to say at the outset that the feed yard sectors and the auction market sectors work very closely in developing our metrics. Our facilities in many respects are very similar, and where there are differences, the auction markets tailored their metrics to be applicable to their operations, but the feed yard metrics and the auction markets metrics look very similar. Before I dive into the metrics, I have a few remarks that I'd like to make, and I just want to reiterate what Ben and Steve said at the beginning, that the feed yard metrics were developed by the U.S. Roundtable Feed Yard membership, and the metrics went through several rounds of comments from the feed yard sector membership as well as the other sectors. But in the end, it was up to the feed yard sector to decide whether a comment had merit and was either incorporated into the metrics or we had a good reason and gave an explanation for why we did not incorporate it. Our goal was to keep the metrics broad and accommodate a large percentage, if not all, the feed yards today, yet they had to be detailed enough that even the most sophisticated have room for improvement. So at first read, the metrics may seem overly simplified, but I think when Scott Anderson goes through the sustainability assessment guide, you'll find that they are comprehensive systems that allow everyone the opportunity to improve. And the last thing that I would say before we get into the metrics is maintaining a profitable cattle feeding industry has been at the forefront of the feed yard sector's discussions. We fully understand that it takes a profitable enterprise to be able to take care of the social and environmental aspects of our businesses. The sustainability assessments and the self-assessments and the sustainability assessment guides are not intended to be pass-fail or sustainable/unsustainable exercises. Instead, they are self-assessment that allows you to benchmark where you are today and formulate a strategy for you to improve at your own pace. So with that, we'll get into the actual metrics, and I won't read the definition of the indicator. Steve has done that. So for the feed yard sector, under land resources, our metric has a nutrient management strategy or plan been implementing. Now, depending on the size of a feed yard, a nutrient management plan may be a regulatory requirement. Whether it's required or not, I think we can all agree that properly managing our land and natural resources is something that we can all embrace. Nutrient management is a concept that sounds very simple, but in reality, a nutrient management plan addresses all aspects of resource management. So whether your nutrient management plan is basic or very comprehensive, there are always improvements that could be made. So now let's go to the water resources indicator. For the feed yard sector, the water resource metric is our water resource management strategies implemented at the feed yard that address water management, water use optimization/conservation, and water quality. This may be a metric that you say, I don't have a water resource management strategy. However, I bet you do. It's probably not written down, but I don't know of any feed yard that doesn't manage water. It's too valuable a resource to waste and not take care of. So we were careful to word this metric as water use optimization/conservation. The bulk of the water used at a feed yard is for cattle drinking, and everyone understands and expects that cattle will have free choice to water. However, there are many opportunities to fix leaks, use more efficient irrigation systems, and simply measure water use, but no one is advocating to limit water for cattle. The water quality aspect of this metric is addressed through the nutrient management plan. And with properly lined retention ponds, proper wastewater application rates, preventing runoff, and etc., feed yards can protect surface and groundwater quality. Now I believe we'll go to the greenhouse gas. The air and greenhouse gas emissions indicator. And the feed yard metric for this is our strategies in place to manage air and greenhouse gas emissions. This may be the metric that makes you shudder when you think about it. But really, when you give this consideration, feed yards inherently curb methane emissions from cattle by feeding high concentrate diets that are formulated to meet all the needs of the cattle. In addition, the use of technologies that improve animal health and performance also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There are also a number of ways that feed yards manage odor, particulate matter or dust, and other air emissions. This metric may be less formalized by most feed yards, but nonetheless, I bet you're doing several things on your feed yard to manage air and greenhouse gas emissions. So now let's go to efficiency and yield. The metric for the feed yard sector under efficiency and yield is our cattle performance and operational efficiency tracked over time. You know, efficiency and yield is the name of the game for feed yards. Profitability is directly tied to efficiency. The metric is our cattle performance and operational efficiency tracked over time. And I don't know of any feed yard that does not track cattle performance and operational efficiency. However, I think we would all agree there's still room for improvement. Going back to my first statement, feed yards are always looking for ways to gain efficiency. This metric supports technologies that enhance animal performance, reduce waste, and promote profitability. Now let's go to the animal health and well-being indicator. And the feed yard metric is our employees trained and beef quality assurance principles being implemented at the feed yard. We chose this metric because BQA is a very comprehensive program that has been developed by the industry, and it covers all aspects of animal health and well-being. Having employees trained and BQA principles implemented should be a goal that is attainable by all feed yards, and yet there are probably areas in which every feed yard can improve. I hope you all will agree that an increased focus on BQA is good for the industry, good for the cattle in our care, and good for the bottom line. And the final indicator is employee safety and well-being. And the metric under this indicator is our employees trained and is an employee safety program implemented at the feed yard. This could very well be the most important metric in the deck. Providing a safe workplace and training employees to work safely is just the right thing to do. As we have more and more employees with no agricultural background or experience, it becomes even more important that we provide training and programs to help them understand how to do their job safely. Anyone involved with the safety program knows how challenging it is to keep the training relevant and effective, and so continuous improvement is just a natural part of any safety program. So in closing, I hope you agree that the feed yard metrics are reasonable, but whether you agree or disagree, I want to encourage everyone to give us feedback. We really do want to know what you think. As I said several times, there is room for improvement, but I want to stress that nothing is mandated or regulated, and any improvements are at your own pace. I know improvements will be made. It's the nature of our industry, but the speed at which they occur is up to each individual feed yard. And with that, I would like to introduce Mike Williams, cow-calf producer from California with the Diamond W Cattle Company, to talk about the cow-calf sustainability, cow-calf sector sustainability assessment guide.
Mike, is your phone unmuted?
Hello, can you hear me?
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I apologize for that. Okay, well, what I want to talk about is the supporting or the sustainability assessment guides that Ben talked about earlier. It was clear early on in this process as we were they developed the indicators, and we developed we were talking about these metrics that we was going to need something that expanded a little bit on them metrics, what they are, and what we mean by them, and why they're important to sustainability, and why they're important to producers. An example would be a lot of people, it might be pretty clear on how a grazing management plan would have an effect on the indicator of water resources, but a lot of people might not understand how that applies. It'd be pretty clear how it applies to land resources. So these sustainability assessment guides were designed to elaborate a little bit on what we mean by the metrics and why it's important. And the challenge that we had as we did this was trying to come up with a document or a definition that was meaningful that to producers all across the country, and yet take into account the wide variety of operations, the differences in climate, the differences in size and scope, and the nature of the producers in the different parts of the country, or even from one side of the fence to the other. These operations, as everybody knows, vary very widely, and so there's no one size fits all box for any of these practices. And so we came up with some key elements that pretty much can cut across all these geographic, cultural, regional, and size and scope differences, and be applied, or at least considered, by all operators throughout the United States. And that was the effort that we did here. And those are a lot of the key elements that Steve mentioned earlier, and in some of these contexts. What this is, or what the Sustainability Assessment Guide, or as we sometimes call it, the SAG, is it describes the metrics, why it's important to the indicator, as well as why it's important to the producer, the key elements that cut across the differences in operation, size, scope, and region, and why it's important to the producer and the overall sustainability of the industry. What this SAG is not, it's not a template, it's not an instruction manual, it's not a checklist or a requirement of what's expected or what's needed to be in order to be sustainable. It's just to provoke thought and consideration as producers look at that and see how these issues apply into their operation. Now, we're currently working on, and it's not in the current sustainability framework, but we're currently working on a resource and tool section that will include in a later version that will give producers a place or places to go, extension, college extension places, advisors, NRCS numbers, or different organizations that can help them, adapt some of these tools, and even possibly some templates or things like that they can look at as they explore some of these practices and include them into these operations. But that's not what the Sustainability Assessment Guide is. It's more an overall, what it suggests, a guideline or something to consider. And as you consider this, you heard Ben talked earlier about continuous improvement. I want to talk just a little bit about that and how it, and the difference that will be applied versus what like for the Roundtable, for example, would consider continuous improvement, and what at the producer level, continuous improvement. At the Roundtable level, what we'd like to see, and what the goal is, or the success criteria, is an increased adoption of of grazing management plan. And I think Steve did a good job in explaining how, measuring uptake, more producers get involved in some of these practices, for example, grazing management plan, that we'll see an improvement in the overall indicator. But and this is all going to be measured through accurate data, surveys, and pretty high level stuff, but it has little effect on the individual operator. Now the same concept, this continuous improvement model, is something that ranchers are already doing, I think, on a regular basis, but it just codifies it and makes it kind of neat in a diagram that when, as you go through these practices and as producers set their goals and identify their objectives and make their plans and execute and review these plans, that each individual operation is going to see improvement in their operation. And then that'll be the incentive to increase and improve some more, because as your pastures get better, as your workforce is doing better, as your animal production systems get better through these plans and these processes, it'll encourage your ranchers like us to continue this process, and we'll, in essence, get better. And by us getting better, we will increase the sustainability of the industry on an individual level. So there's a difference in what applies to producers, but as well as what applies to the overall roundtable. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, even though some of these slides going through each of these individual metrics. I think Steve did a great job, kind of talking about the key elements and the rest of the slides in each one. But I will say this about each of these metrics: there's not anything in these metrics or in these SAG documents that, if a producer applies them to his operation, won't make his operation a better operation. As a sustainable operation, a better operation is a sustainable operation. And so the two words are, sustainability is maybe a new word that beef producers aren't used to and maybe aren't very comfortable with, because of it's been kind of used as a weapon to smack us around in the past. But the concept is as old as ranching, and we've been basically doing this for over 100 years. We didn't maybe call it sustainability. We called it surviving in the past. But that's what this is about: helping producers, giving producers resources and ideas to help them make choices that'll enhance and make their operations better. And by making operations better, we'll make the beef industry more sustainable. So with details are, I'll go ahead and hand this over to Scott. He was a feeder and was working with the SAGs for the feed yard sector.
Thanks, Mike. One of the things as we get started thinking about the feed yard side of it, as we were rolling into this, we wanted to make sure that, if there's already things out there that we're currently doing, let's make sure that we, pull those in. As Tom mentioned, on the land side, the nutrient management plan fits there. And to move over into the water resources side, as Tom mentioned before, water's critical. It's just, one of those things we have to make sure we have adequate quantity, and then it also has to be of adequate quality. And so all of those things that we do, not only from a production side, making sure we have enough available water to satisfy the needs of the animals, but also, throughout the rest of the needs of the operation for production, milling, wash down, all those other related things. And then, also folded into this is stormwater runoff, manure, all those other things. Looking at these key elements, for instance, like number 1, it says improve water management, conservation, and reuse. An example of that, several years ago, we got to looking at, all of the wastewater that comes out of the mill. There was blowdown water, there was, various other sources of things that, just ended up going down the drain, and we were real uncomfortable with that, and so had the opportunity to do some work there. And so we started to look, and by putting in a reverse osmosis water treatment system was the first step, because the output of that, you can take the pure water, we'll call it, to go directly into the boilers, which reduces your boiler blowdown, and so there's a savings there. And then by capturing what we'll call the reject water out of that same system, storing it in a tank, and then turn around and using that to add moisture back to our grain for the flaking process, enabled us to save that water as well, and reuse it in a fashion that saved us money and allowed us to stop sending a lot of wasted water down the drain. So it's just, there's little things like that we can do, a lot of places. And so, one of the challenges that we would ask each of you is, to just look around your operation and see, where are these opportunities within your operation that you can apply some of these things to improve your efficiencies and show improvement over time. The next 2 items are pretty obvious. You have to make sure adequate water supplies are available for not only today's needs, but for the future. And so there aren't anything here that, is outside the realm of practical application, but, we have a great story to tell, and a lot of the sustainability process and things that the Roundtable has put together is just a way to put the pieces of our story together in a fashion that we can pass it on up through our other partners in the supply chain to help answer some of the questions that the consumers are continually asking about, how their food is made. If you want to move forward to, say, the air and greenhouse gases, there again, we're a very diversified feeding industry. We range in geography all over the country, and along with that come, wide ranges in rainfall, and so some places have to, as Tom mentioned, deal with getting rid of water, and other places conserving water. Dust production, just through the mill, for instance, if we can capture some, if you're grinding your own hay or something like that, if there's a way to capture some of that dust, think of the shrink that you can potentially save, which adds to your efficiency of your operation, but it also reduces, nuisance issues. And as was alluded to earlier, there's lots of practices out there that we can do to improve animal performance and the conversion rate of feed, which ties directly into our ability to help minimize greenhouse gas emissions from these feed yards. Moving on into the efficiency and yield, Tom alluded that everybody watches not only the financial performance, and when you look at financial performance, that's more than just looking to see if you paid more taxes this year than you did last year, or if your checking account balance is bigger at the end of this year than it was last year. There's lots of things that go into that, and one, as we met early on in the roundtable, to a person in the room, everybody agreed that we need to be able to keep these operations profitable so that we can take the first step towards sustainability. but there's also things that we can track as far as animal performance, energy use across the yard, whether it's electricity or petroleum items, something as simple as just, managing idle time on vehicles. That costs money. And for the sake of time, I think I will pass it on to Clayton Huseman with KLA. As been mentioned before, we're at the point now to where we would like you to go dig deeper into all of this, look through all of the other layers of detail that are out there, and provide feedback for us. And Clayton will walk through how you can do that. Appreciate you attending tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. As you can see, there has been a lot of work put into this project, and it's generated a fairly lengthy work product that we now want to make available to the industry for input and comment. And so a separate website has been created for that purpose. You'll see it on your screen now. usrsbframework.org is a website set up and tailored to allow you to comment on specific pieces of this product or the entire package. And so the first thing that it'll ask you to do is to register. And once you register and create a login, I think Ashley's going to walk us through this now. Create a login, and you can navigate to specific segments and specific indicators, metrics, and the sustainability assessment guides that support each of those. So just as an example, we'll click on cow-calf, and it'll pull you right to that section of work and allow you to comment on any of the work done for that particular sector. And so while our focus tonight has been on the producer sectors, there's the opportunity to comment on packer, processor, and retail as well. As you'll see over on the right, if there is a specific area that you'd like to comment, it gives you a field to do that and then to post that comment. This format does allow you to come back and edit those later. And so if you don't get through the entire package in one setting, you can come back later and complete your work. So a pretty functional, usable tool here to allow folks to comment on this entire product. One thing we would point out, if that's not the way that you would like to see it and do provide comment, there is a link to a PDF document at the bottom of the website if you'd prefer that approach. And the staff at NCBA are available as needed to help either navigate the website, take comments directly, or help facilitate this process in any way that they can. The comment deadline is July 1, and so we've got some time here to solicit input and feedback and comment, but July 1 is the deadline. So with that, just as a reminder, usrsbframework.org, we would encourage you to take a look at it, specifically those areas that interest you the most, and provide your comments before the 1st of July. At this point, we're going to turn it back to Kevin Kester as we start to wrap up this evening's program.
Thank you, Clayton. And thank you to all of our presenters. NCBA is committed to working for a strong future for the U.S. cattle industry. Being a part of the sustainability conversation is a part of that strategy. Engaging on this issue is no longer a luxury, and we also know it can help in communicating to our consumers that we do care about our animals, our communities, and the environment. As we move into our question and answer session, as Clayton indicated, we need your feedback and hope that you comment on the framework. Now I'll turn it over to Ashley McDonald with NCBA to moderate our question and answer session. Thank you all again for participating in the webinar tonight. Ashley?
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks to all our presenters again from NCBA for presenting on all of the framework content. I know we're past the top of the hour, so we'll just go through just a couple questions and then let you all get back to your evening. So the first question that's kind of come in, and I'll pass this over to Tom McDonald. Is, did the retailers or the packers contribute to this process, and how did they?
Thank you, Ashley. The short answer is yes, but I want to reiterate how the process works, and that is each sector owns their own metrics. And so I'll use feed yards as the example. The feed yard sector developed our first draft. And then that draft went through numerous comment periods, both within the feed yard sector, and then I said to the larger group of all the sectors in the supply chain. And so both in written format and in our meetings when we were discussing our metrics, a lot of times there was retailers, processors, NGOs, everyone was in the room and given the opportunity to provide feedback and comment. But in the end, it was the feed yard sector that said, yes, that's a good idea, or no, for this reason, we don't believe that we should include that. So yes, everyone had input, but it was the feed yard and cow-calf, and each of the sectors own their metrics at the end of the day.
Thanks, Tom. So I will give a question. I'll pass it back to Clayton, who just ended, but wanted to ask you a little bit more about comments and what kind of comments you'd like to see happen on the framework.
Sure, thanks, Ashley. Just first off, deadline July 1, but all types of comments I think are beneficial in this process. Just as importantly, or as things you'd like to see improved, are those things that are good and those things that fit for the producer constituencies and those of us that have been involved. So, areas that can be improved, but just as importantly are those areas that you think we've settled on things that make a lot of sense and can advance what we're trying to do. So all types of comments can be constructive at this point.
Thanks, Clayton. And yeah, and if you or anyone you know has any difficulty commenting, again, please call NCBA or use that contact button on the website, and we will be happy to help. So we'll wrap it up. I'll give one last question, and this one's directed, Kevin, to you, since you have been involved with the Roundtable. And how do you think that this effort can help prove continuous improvement in the face of our critics?
Well, there's several things. Number one, with sustainability, our consumers of beef, not only here in the U.S. but across the world, are asking us to be more transparent. They're wanting to know more about where their food comes from, and so critics across the country have assaulted us in our industry at times for not being sustainable and not doing a good job for this or that. And we know that's not to be the case. So now we actually have a forum, and we have research that we can show that we are sustainable, we're doing a good job, we're handling our animals with health, and our care of our animals is above standards. And so this is Sustainability Roundtable is a forum to communicate with our consumers and let them know about the good things that we're doing and that we're continuing to improve upon. So the word sustainable has been looked at as a negative thing in the past in some segments. But in fact, sustainability going forward is going to be our opportunity to show people that we've doing the job that we all know we've been doing a good job at in keeping our ranches and farms going sustainable into the future generations. So I'm looking forward to having that opportunity to show our consumers that we're doing a good job.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kevin. And thanks to everybody who joined the webinar. There are a couple more questions, or quite a few more questions, that we weren't able to get to tonight, but we don't want to hold you any longer. And so we will make sure that we reach out and answer those questions. So don't despair if we didn't get to your question here tonight. We will reach out. So again, we'd like to thank you for joining the webinar and welcome you to join future Cattlemen's webinars. And the recording will be available for anyone's use in the next couple of days at beefusa.org. So with that, thank you to everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.